Why we're all here tonight. So tonight's speaker is Tracy Osborn. She's the author of these awesome books, Hello Web Design, Hello Web App, which she does on Kickstarter, and they're awesome. And I never met her. I just saw her video online, and I thought she did an amazing job explaining design principles in a very applied way. Like you'll see how she does it. It's really cool. She's going to talk to us today about design for non-designers. You can go to hellowebooks.com and learn all about her stuff. In addition to the book, she has online classes. Her Twitter handle, as we said, is @LimeDaring. So feel free to take pictures. The other thing I didn't mention, if you see a picture of a slide you like, you can tweet that. She's also a founder of WeddingLovely, so she's an entrepreneur as well. And so with that, let's give Tracy a warm welcome here, okay? And we're going to hold questions till the end. We have plenty of time for Q&A at the end. The way questions work is you want to we have mic runners, so just raise your hand, they'll get you a mic, okay?
On. Awesome. Yay, that worked. I was like speed run, like you're on NASCAR. Switch it. Focusing. Hi, I'm Tracy. I'm actually originally from California. I now live in Toronto, Canada, and right now I'm kind of not regretting because my husband is here and he'll get sad if I say I regretted moving to Toronto. But it's so gorgeous outside. And last Sunday, I was running through literal freezing rain in Toronto. So California is amazing right now, and I'm so happy to be here. I am Lime Daring on the internet. It is common that it's a lot of people think it's Lime Darling. I'm just like much too far in this username to go back and change it at this point. So it is Lime Daring. That's also my Speaker Deck username. So I'm going to take these slides and put it on Speaker Deck. I've given this talk a few times before in like different formats. So you could go onto Speaker Deck and see the slides as I go through it. There might be some differences. But I will also take these slides, this version, and upload it after the talk. So as mentioned, I'm also the author. This is kind of what I do for fun. It's kind of my day job, what I do for fun. I write books. And Hello Web Design is the book that I wrote after giving this presentation at a few conferences like a year or so, a half ago. So I gave this presentation and I was like, this is working so well. And so I wrote a book based on this presentation. So this is like everything contained in this talk and more. And I also am the author. This is my first book, which I forgot to bring up. And I have an extra copy here. This is what got me into writing books. So if you don't know Python and Django, this is my introduction to programming for, I aim it towards designers. So this is like my programming for designers, and this is my design for programmer book, which is pretty cool. And they're all designed by me. I self-published. Ask me anything. So talking about design. This is a gigantic subject. This is like, there's so many different facets of design. So when I say design for non-designers, it's like, what part of design? You're like interaction design, visual design, UI, UX, human-computer interaction. Like there is so many different, different parts to design nowadays, so many different specialties. And when I'm talking about design, I'm kind of just distilling it down to just making an interface that works well. So I'm throwing all the specialties out the window. I'm talking in generalities, but hopefully this talk will help you grow more comfortable doing design yourself if you're not already a designer. Because if you're not a designer, if you're a programmer or a marketer or whatnot, especially since we're here in Silicon Valley, a lot of people do startups and whatnot. Even if you're not a designer, you're probably put in a position where you're going to have to design at some point in your career. Like create a homepage for your open source project, which I have quite a few examples. Creating design for your slides, creating the homepage. This is my personal homepage. I stole my husband's homepage as well. Having a homepage, and you have to do design for your personal homepage. So even if you want to avoid design, if you don't prefer to do design, hopefully this presentation will help you feel more comfortable with doing that, because I'm a designer and a developer. My background is in design, and I picked up Python programming and I started doing development probably about 8 or so years ago. And being able to be like just dangerous enough to do both has made my career, like it's taken off by having just enough knowledge in both of these areas. So in this presentation, I'm going to be going over basically two different parts. One is going to be going over some basic design principles, and then at the end, I'm going to go over the design process to help walk you through the process of ideation and creating those designs. So, how can we create effective, simple designs? Let's talk about clutter. This is my favorite example of clutter. I mean, GoDaddy's site is so much nicer now. I have to give them credit for updating their site. But we all remember this, right? From back in the day. Like we knew then, like there's colors everywhere, there's different fonts, like images, everything's smushed together. They're just like the perfect example of a cluttery website. Thanks, GoDaddy. The number one thing I want you to take away from this talk when it comes to visual design, the one thing to remember, the fastest way to better looking designs is to simply cut down on clutter. To illustrate this, I have this little widget here, and it's a little ugly. And we're going to go through and walk through some design principles you probably have heard about and apply those design principles into this widget, and you can see how it slowly improves as we apply those principles. The first thing we're going to talk about is the grid. Now, grid is like a big, like people always talk about the grid and making and breaking the grid, and I like to just redefine it. The grid is just simply lining things up, because when things aren't lined up together, when there's little pixel differences between items on a page, those little differences are either consciously or unconsciously noticed. It leads to this feeling of discord and kind of clutter on the page. The shortcut here, there's a lot of, like, you can go in and like read about grid systems and go into design books, and there's lots of theory about grid. But for you, hopefully here, I don't want you to go out and try to become a designer. I want you to go find and use the resources that are available to you online. And thankfully, for web design, there are so many different CSS frameworks and things available to us to add grids to our designs without having to like really think about it. So of course, Bootstrap is my favorite. It can be like a gigantic thing to add to your project. There's so much code and so much CSS and JavaScript. But I like the hand-holding that Bootstrap does for me. And it has that grid, the grid system all built in. So when you're adding elements to your design, you don't have to worry about where they're going to go. You can just align it to the grid system, and you know that that vertical alignment is in place. Of course, there's other ones like Foundation, Skeleton, and outside of these CSS frameworks, we're now getting into CSS grid. So you don't have to like install a framework. It's going to be in CSS, in CSS itself. So just thinking about grid as just lining things up, just getting things onto the same planes. We'll take our widget and we'll clean up the edges. That's all we're going to do. And you can see that it's starting to feel a little bit more cohesive, a little bit less chaotic. The next thing I'm going to chat about is color. Now, color is a gigantic subject, and like I said, my background is in design. I have a degree in graphic design from Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, and there's at least one, I think I did multiple classes, but at least one class is all on color theory, and it was ridiculous. It was fun, but part of that color theory class was taking a pot of white color, adding a drop of black, painting a swatch, and adding another drop of black and painting a swatch until I had like 400 swatches, and then you have to nail it down to your 20 that evenly space out white to black to like train your brain, and that's ridiculous. We're not going to do that. Good. I like to tell that story because it reminds myself of the hell I went through when I was a designer. All right, so to look at the color principles, to distill it down to like the top principles to remember for colors. For newbies is number one, try to use complementary colors. And I'll get into that in a second, but colors that are complementary to each other. And then use mostly neutrals and one brighter color to draw attention to what you want to be seen. Now, those are still kind of overwhelming principles. There is this article, it's on Smashing Magazine, and it is fantastic. So I get to this point, I'm like, here are these principles. You know, if you want to read more, this is an awesome article aimed at developers. So it's a simple web developer's guide to color. But we're going to go straight to a shortcut. And the shortcut is to use a color palette website. So instead of going onto Photoshop or Sketch and looking at the color palette and picking things out and applying things and being like, oh my God, I don't even do that. And I have that background design. That is like way too much work for me. I'd much rather go to a website and kind of just futz around until it just generates a color palette for me. And then I can try a few color palettes, and then the colors are guaranteed to be complementary and work well together, because the website did like 95% of the work. Then I just have to apply those colors to my design. So a good one is Adobe's color.adobe.com. And that's the top left here, you can see it's complementary colors, but you can choose other ways of the colors combining to each other. Just play around with it. It's really fun to use. Google has their material design color website. Another great one, this is one I prefer, is colormind.io. And again, these slides will be put up online, so you don't have to worry about writing them down. But this one, you just press one button and it generates color palettes for you. And then you can go ahead and apply them to your design, or just play with it until you find one that you think that was going to work well. But it saves you a lot of that time of going into Photoshop and playing around. So back to this little widget. And I'll repeat this again, is that the first color palette you try is probably not going to work out. So go through and try a few ones and see how the colors work well together, how they work together. So you might grab one, start playing around, maybe try one that's using kind of shades of the same color, until you find one that seems to work well for you. The next design principle going over is fonts and typefaces. And so to go straight to those like good things to remember. Keep the number of fonts low as a rule of thumb when you're starting out. Like 2 fonts is like a really good number to keep in mind. Have like 2 of them that are working well on your page. And you can obviously, all these things can be broken as you get better at design. But when you're just starting out, it's good just to start with 2, and then you can play with like italics and bolding or other things to like add like differentiation in your design, rather than adding in more fonts that could add that feeling of clutter. And then use fancy / display fonts sparingly. And this is the background of this slide. You might remember these fonts from the 90s as well, or those like crazy like free font websites. And these can work in designs, but when you're just starting out, these look very cluttery. So it's better to stick with simple and just start out with that. So I took my website and kind of just futzed around and put a bunch of different fonts in there, and I was like, ah. And then this is just one. Actually, no, it's 2 fonts in here. You can see how this, even though everything is arranged in the same way, having different typefaces in there makes it look really cluttery, rather than just using 2. And this is my resume. Same thing. This one's again just 2 different fonts, but you can see how from different colors, using italics, using all caps, spacing things out, you can have something that looks, there's like different distinct pieces, but it's still using only 2 different typefaces. But how do you know what typefaces to use? That's the big thing. And here's the shortcut here, is to use websites that curate fonts for you. So I like to recommend for this kind of thing is, stepping away from your system fonts and going on and using something like Typekit, which I think you have to pay for. And then my favorite is Google Fonts. But Google Fonts, as you're scrolling through, there's like 3 billion fonts on there, and you're like, which ones do I use? I don't know if this one's good or bad. But there's a bunch of websites out on the web, where people just take fonts and they can see how they work together. So this is Beautiful Web Type, and it's just the showcase of the best typefaces in the Google Web Fonts directory. Typewolf also does the same thing, where they curated the top 30 Google fonts. Font Pair just takes 2 different fonts from Google, and so you can from Google Fonts, and you can see how they work together. And I find that visually a lot easier when you see the fonts from Google Fonts being used together. It makes it a lot easier to choose which ones to use for your design, rather than say going through Google Fonts. Oh, and there's also fontpair.co. So back to this little widget, and I think there's 4 separate typefaces on here, and we're going to change it to just 2. We have a serif font, which just means it has like the little feet on the letters, and a sans serif font. But you're using italics, and we have all caps in the button. We have that spaced out a little bit. So we have pieces that look distinct from each other, but it's only two different typefaces, and it's looking a little bit cleaner. The next one is my favorite, is white space. And white space is the ultimate clutter reducer. And it's the thing that a lot of newbie designers struggle with, is adding enough white space to their design to let their designs breathe and feel like more higher quality. My favorite example of a very popular website that is very, very lacking in white space is Hacker News. And it amuses me because every now and then some article will get upvoted on Hacker News where someone says, hey, I redesigned Hacker News. Check out this like beautiful PSD that I created that would totally work. And all of them are like adding more white space in general. It's like that's the main thing they're doing is adding white space, trying to make it look prettier. I don't think Hacker News will ever change. But like looking at New York Times redesign, they changed a lot of things. But one of the biggest things that they did to make their website feel cleaner, because they can't just like add acres of white space like some of the popular websites out there, like do this giant banner on top or what I'm talking about. They have to have a lot of information, a lot of content on their homepage. And this is the redesigned one. And one of the main things they did, they took the color principle and they dialed it down. You notice that the links are no longer blue, which helps with reducing clutter. But one of the biggest things that they did is that the columns of space, the space in between the columns of content was widened just enough to let that content breathe. So just adding a little bit of white space, along with a few other updates, made the New York Times homepage, even though it has so much content, feel less cluttery. White space makes a website feel more professional and more luxurious, which is why, like, when you look at luxury websites, it's like everywhere is a white space. If you go into those websites that collect like the top CSS web designs, which there's a billion, and I'll go over a few of them myself a little bit later on, you notice that I just took a random screenshot on here, and every single one of them is just like white space everywhere. And just another example of my own personal homepage, where you just like from there to there, and you can feel that it feels a lot more airy, a little bit more professional. But it's not just a visual thing. White space can drastically affect your bottom line. So there's this study that was done between these two tables of content, and all they did was added more vertical space in between their tables. That was like reducing those. They took away the links on the top left and then added more vertical space. And by just adding that space, they saw a 20% improvement in engagement, a 5% improvement in products added to the cart, and a 33% improvement in customers continuing on to purchase. So it's not just a visual thing. It's not just like adding that feeling of luxury, but it can affect how well your website is working. So back to the little widget. We're just going to open it up a little bit. So the main differences in here is not just white space around the content, but there's also white space added in between the lines of content themselves. Some line height there. Another thing that's done is that the spacing in between the elements is also made to be more similar. So the same amount of space is in between the headline and the content, the form, and the button. And that space also matches the space around the edge. So there might be some other tweaks we can do, but we can see by making those white space adjustments on this widget that that feeling of clutter has decreased, and the feeling of professionalism or like looks nicer in general. So for this first principle, for this first half, when we're just talking about visual design, the main thing to remember is that when you're working on design, is just to reduce visual clutter. Look at your fonts, look at your colors, look at the white space, and do what you can to reduce that feeling of clutter, and you're going to have a better design at the end of it. Aiming for a clean design as a design newbie will take you really far. You can't just talk about design and visual stuff without talking a little bit about user experience. And user experience is arguably, is definitely more important with how your website. It's more important how your website works and your design works and how it looks. So to take this section and kind of distill it down to those top principles to remember, the thing to remember in whatever your design is to figure out what you want someone to do. What do you want the action? Like someone who's visiting your homepage or your startup homepage, what is that most important action? And then focus on improving how well that important action is found and used. This is my fault, kind of. So this is this is Gumroad. This is where I sell my websites. And they had this design, a drop down where I can choose different designs for my homepage. And people kept emailing me being like, how do I buy your book? And I'm like, what are you talking about? You go onto Gumroad and you buy the book. And it's because of that I want this button is using a ghost button. It does not visually feel like a button. You can see that Gumroad has nice looking buttons in the top right because that's part of my admin panel. If I just stayed with their default design and didn't realize that that happened to the buttons, then the user experience would have improved. But the most important action on this page, if you ignore that admin area, is that I want this button. It was not being found. It wasn't being used because it's a ghost. It's what's known as a ghost button. It doesn't look like a button, and therefore people weren't clicking on it. When it comes to action, say if you're writing a blog post and you want someone to join a newsletter, instead of hiding links, with no underlines within a paragraph of content, this is where you can be like, okay, the thing I want someone to do is to join my newsletter, and here's that link. And it would be easier to use this and see it, and someone to fill out this form if I pull it out, give it a headline, add a button, make it more visible. And this is why buttons on widgets like this are brightly colored and easy to see, not those ghost buttons. That's why we're using a strong contrasting color here, because if this was like, say, another shade of green, it might not catch the eye. I just did all this thing rallying against ghost buttons, and here's my website. This is the old version of my website. It's actually changed. But that's the reason why that Get the Books button is in that bright standout color. The free sample area is there for someone to click on it, but the main thing I want someone to do is to click on that Get the Books button. That's why it's bright. That's why it's visible. Here's another example. Same thing. Everything in the background is a very gray and desaturated, and there's this bright blue button right up in front, ready to be clicked. And it's not just like the banners and headlines on your website. For the Wealthfront Engineering blog, you can argue the whole reason why they have a blog on their website is because they want someone to read their articles about how knowledgeable and impressive their engineers are, and then they'll see this little banner in the bottom, in the sidebar saying, "Hey, like what you see here? Come join our team." So that is something that's very important to them. They want it to be, thankfully it's not up front in the banner, but it's still visible. You can tell that they want that to be seen and used. That's just using color to make our things or make our user experiences more usable. But in general, pay attention to your goals, see what you want someone to do and how you want someone to use your design, and then try to make those actions easy to find and use. Just by thinking about the actions that your users are going to be using on your design will help you improve your user experience. I'm going to take this part of the talk to talk a little bit about content, because this is a part that gets forgotten in a lot of design. What you write, how long and how much you write is actually quite one of the biggest parts of your design, because it's part of that user experience. When you're writing something on your website, you want someone to read it and understand and not be turned off. So a lot of design newbies, when they're writing content for their website, have a tendency to write too much. So say your about page and it's just like paragraphs and paragraphs and an essay of content. And let me tell you, no one's going to read that. No one reads on the internet. Less is more. The shorter, the more succinct, the clearer paragraphs you can do, the more likely that the users on your website are going to read what you've written. Because big clear paragraphs are also a sign of clutter. When someone sees an essay on a homepage of a startup, they're more likely to leave than read and stay. Now, if you can't take those big paragraphs, I have information here, I can't get rid of it. You can also break it into bullets. I'll go into that in just a second to show you how that is done. In terms of making things more succinct, this is like proper English. Please note that although Chrome is supported for both Mac and Windows operating systems, it is recommended that all users of this site switch to the most up-to-date version of the Firefox web browser for the best possible results. That's wordy though. And you can say the same thing in much shorter. For best results, use the latest version of Firefox. Chrome for Mac and Windows is also supported. Same thing, but that one's shorter. It's easier to read. It's less, that content clutter isn't there. Now this one I'm not going to read, but you can see there's like this paragraph on the left, and it's like, I'm not going to read that. So step one, taking a paragraph and breaking it into bullets gives someone who is skimming content on a page a place to rest their eyes. So instead of just going over that paragraph, the bullets are going to start like giving someone to be like, then here, then here, then here, then here, then skipping the whole thing. But this is where I like to start adding in other tricks like strategic bolding. So not only is this paragraph has been broken up into bullets to make it easier to read, adding strategic bolding will pop out the important parts of that paragraph, and someone who is skimming, which is everybody on the internet, is going to skim through this, and their eye is going to catch on those bolded parts, and if it's interesting to them, then they're going to read further. But it drastically improves the amount of people that are going to be reading your content instead of just skimming and scrolling through. We talked about white space, and if you have the ability, take these bullet points that are all squished together, adding some more white space in there is also going to improve the readability. So play around with those different tools of bolding and spacing and bullets in order to break up your content and make it easier to read. Not just your content, like your paragraphs of content, but also look at your headlines. Because headlines are very, very important for, say, if you have a startup homepage with a big headline at the top, you want that to excite people and get them interested and get them to click on your product. And that also can suffer from wordiness. So you want to keep it short, you want to keep it exciting. And when it comes to headlines, you want to talk benefits, not details. You want to talk about what you've written affects the person who's reading it, not just like what it is. I'll have some examples in a second. And this is also a place where I like to remind people to use natural and friendly language, because no one wants to read stuff that's written by a robot. So again, going back to my old version of my homepage, this is technically what my first books were about. They're an introduction to building web apps using Python and Django. And that's boring, that's long, that's like stodgy and weird and robotic. But if you change that to learn how to build a web app, it's telling you what the book is about, and it's telling the reader what it does for them. This is another place that making these changes can affect your bottom line. So in this case study, a simple headline change, which was just changing the headline's content from talking benefits, not details, improved conversions by 52.8%. We're not done with the widget yet. We improved the design, we improved like the visuals of the widget, but now we've talked about content, you can see like, that's a really boring headline. That is probably a lot more text than you need for a little widget, and just email address, download, a little bit robotic. We're going to update that. We're going to change that headline to talking benefits. We're going to shorten that content that's in the middle. We're going to add some bolding just over that important part. We'll take that form and we're going to make it a little bit more human. Instead of just saying like email address, you can say add your email here. And then in the button, we're going to use that all important word free, but it's a lot nicer than just like download. a little bit more human. So for all these design principles, we have gone from this to this. So I hope you see how each of those different aspects of design can build on each other to create a nicer looking design. So the next section, this widget does not have images, so this is pulled out, is images and imagery. So we haven't been talking about images or symbols or graphics for your website yet. So going over those main principles, thing to remember is stock photos usually look like stock photos. So if you go into like istockphoto.com, there is a lot of duds out there. So if you're looking for images to use for your designs, use a critical eye, because when you see a stock photo, a lot of people are going to turn on, turned off, wrong one, and then leave the website. But you can accomplish a lot with just type and screenshots. So if you're new to design and you're worrying about like having icons and having a lot of graphics, like don't worry about it to start. You can always add it into your design, but just creating a design that's just type and screenshots even just playing around with type can take you really far without having to worry about adding images as well. And of course, when you're working with images, pay attention to file size, because we have and Retina quality images, and these tie together because you want to support Retina screens, but then your images are gigantic because they have to be a lot more like pixels. So those things will just keep in mind when you're choosing your images. But like icons can really like be a nice little cherry on top on a design. This is the Stripe website, and you can see how having these simple icons above their features draws the eye. They look really great, and they kind of add this little polish into the design. This is my favorite resource for big images. This is unsplash.com. The link is also up there in the top right. So Unsplash is free images you can use in your designs. There's no, they're all high resolution. I think they're really heavily curated, so they're all really gorgeous looking images. So if you're looking for a really beautiful photograph for your designs, take a look at Unsplash first. There's also photopin.com. I use this a lot for blog posts, and they'll search Flickrs for Creative Commons images that you can use in your design. So these ones aren't done by professional photographers. That's the reason why I like to use it for blog posts, is that they feel a little more human and a little bit like less glossy, and it works really well for blog posts. And when it comes to graphics, there's a lot of, if you wanted to do icons or simple icons, there's a lot of designers on Fiverr or these other websites that you can pay and get some icons done. Again, you don't have to do that for design. There's no requirements for you to get icons designed for you, but take a look at these places and see if that works out for you, because it could be something nice to add to your design. You don't have to just like go out and get like professionally done images for your site from like a professional graphic designer. These are my friends. I don't think this app Canary actually exists anymore because they were acquired. But they've done a lot in their design with just type and a screenshot of their command line. But just below their the top of their homepage, they worked with a local designer in Toronto to get little illustrations. And this is not something you usually see in a tech startup homepage, which is why I love it. This is eye-catching. It's different. It's really cool. They're working with a local designer, and they said they got a really good deal with it. So you don't have to just follow like icons and follow the trends of other tech startups out there. Feel free to do something that like looks a little unique like this. Now, in terms of the process of design, don't be afraid of imitation. I love that. Say if you're like sitting down at your desk and you're like, all right, I'm going to work on my homepage design. So you take your desk and you wipe everything clear. And then you take this piece of paper and a pencil and you're like, I'm going to design. And you start like sketching things out. And if you're like me, because this is what happens, you'd stare at your paper and be like, now what? Like nothing comes out. You can't just like design on demand. And if you're trying to design without having inspiration and looking at things first and creating ideas, if you just like wipe everything clear and try to design from scratch, that's a lot like trying to develop without the use of Google or Stack Overflow. Like, you can do it. You can like work on your, turn off your internet and create your program without having like be able to check Stack Overflow. It's totally doable, but it's a lot harder. So for design, use inspiration, use what's out there. Don't copy. But it's a great way to like start getting those that design flow going. My books are very obviously inspired by a Book of Parts book, or at least they're obvious to me because I know that I use them. With Book Apart, I looked at their books and I was like, they do a great job. They have bright colors, they have prominent typography. I love the form factor, the size, the height and width of my books and everything. I did steal from their books. So I was like, this is the perfect size for a book. So without a Book Apart, without using them for inspiration, I don't think I could have designed my books as well as I did. So I say myself. Without using a Book Apart for inspiration. And I think everyone out there, like a lot of new designers, I think forget the fact that they can look out and get inspiration and grab ideas. Again, not steal ideas. Don't use anything verbatim, but use that to kind of start building up an idea of what you can do. Where do you find ideas? So there's a lot of websites on the internet that just collect good website designs. So there's Site Inspire, Unmatched Style, CSS Mania. So you can go on these websites. When you have a new project in mind, you can go onto these websites and just go through until you see something you're like, oh, that's a great way of doing a menu. Oh, I really like what they did with that logo. Oh, the way this is laid out, this is really great. And you can also look at, your competitors, pick out what they're doing, see what they're doing good, what they're not doing so well, and start formulating those ideas when you start working on your design project. Even if you're not working on a design project like at the moment, but you see something that's awesome, try to pick out what they're doing well, and it's going to help train your design intuition. So this is an old version of the Slack homepage. It's not looks like this, but I think they did a really good looking homepage. And when I say, like, when you see something that seems to be working well, try to pick out why it's working well. For example, they have a lot of white space. There's a large amount of white space on there. It doesn't feel like a large amount of white space because they have that background image. So it kind of fills it in. But the content itself, you can see there's a lot of space on the left and right. That's giving a lot of breathing room. The form is easier to see because they have a darker background on it. So that's another cool design trick that you can kind of steal from them. They have the word free bolded. They have NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory bolded as well as Slack. So you're associating those two things together. That's a cool idea. They have little squiggles underneath the words on their headline, which you don't usually see. So that's also eye-catching and kind of cool. The top right, they have a line around the thing that, like the menu item that is the most important. Hello, where'd you go? No, go back. There we go. So there's lots of cool things that Slack is doing. And if you see a website design that you like, the heck? Yeah, okay. Yes. So when you see a design that you're like, that is a cool looking design, take a couple minutes and look at it and try to think about why it looks good. Because this is going to start developing your design eye, your design intuition. And it's going to make it easier for you when you're sitting down and working on your own designs to kind of regurgitate all those good ideas that you've been collecting by looking at designs. So it's just being critical and thinking about design as you go about, not just when you're designing, is going to help you long-term become a better designer. As Pablo Picasso supposedly said, great artists copy, good artists copy, great artists steal. Then Bansky came along. The bad artists imitate, the great artists steal. Good job, Bansky. There's even books on this, steal like an artist. Like, this is a thing that all artists and designers do. We all steal from each other and grab inspiration and build on, there's probably one person out there who's just like the best designer, and then the rest of us are all just learning from that one person. So use that as a design tool when you're working on design. Don't worry about creating something entirely from scratch. Again, don't steal, don't like grab a menu and steal their CSS and put it on your website. Don't do that, but be inspired. It's going to help you become a better designer. All right, last bit. Quick overview of a design process, just to walk you through this. First one, as we just said, collect inspiration and start sketching out ideas. This is specifically how I collect inspiration. In my Feedly, my feed reader, I track all of those like top CSS websites, and I can, with my keyboard like JK, I can just go through a bunch of designs, pick out the ones I like and pull them out and then inspect them. And it's a really fast way for me to just go through a bunch of design and pick out the things. Now, when I talk about sketching ideas, I do not mean this. This person is showing off. There's no like fancy like shading around the edges and really perfect writing and all these like nice little graphics. They're actually pictures from my sketchbook. This is when I was redesigning the Hello Web App Webbooks homepage. It's just boxes and lines and squares, just like real low fidelity. Don't worry about perfect sketches. Now, I was going through and just trying to figure out layouts and how I wanted like images and how things were going to relate to each other. So don't worry about doing something perfect. As you go through and you see ideas that you like, sketching out just like really quickly is also going to help that information stick in your brain. Now, you could at this point in the process go in and start building your website in HTML and CSS and JavaScript. But the mocking up process, the part of the design process, is really useful. So your mockups don't also have to be visually perfect. This was a project I was working on with my husband, and I use it as a way to figure out the layout and how the design was going to essentially work. So this is not the same color. This is not going to be black and white. It wasn't going to use those fonts. There might be like more imagery. But we knew that we wanted to have mainly a small, like a thin column of information. Wanted to have that content broken up into bullets. A nice centered headline with the menu buttons in the left and right, because those were, not as important as that like headline right there. Then we wanted to have some like help text under the form, and it helped us figure out the kind of wording we wanted. So for mockups, you don't have to go in. Another one I've done. You don't have to do this. You don't have to go and make it perfect and get those gradients and get those colors. And if you want to spend time doing that, you can. But it's really useful in mockups just to like lay it out, get that content in. This is a place where you can start shortening your content and testing it out. And it's a lot easier for moving things around and trying new things than, say, if you went straight to building your design in HTML and CSS and JavaScript. And then build it, which is, another gigantic presentation. So when it comes to design, this is my thought process every single time I sit down with a new design to work on. And I've been doing this. I've been building websites since I was 12, and I'm 33. So I've been doing this a long time. Every single time, my brain just like yelling at me that I'm a terrible designer. I'm sketching things out, I'm mocking things up, and I'm just like, oh, this is not working. Like, did I lose everything? Like, am I like lobotomized? Like, why am I a terrible designer? Until this one magical moment where I move something or change something, and all of a sudden I'm like, yes, that works. That works better. And sometimes it's not yes, sometimes it's maybe, But there's that beginning point that always happens. And I think that happens to every designer out there. So if you're new to design, you're working on your first design, and your brain is going crap, 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 crap. Not really reassuring to tell you that everyone goes through it, but welcome to the process of design. It's not just you, it's everybody. That's how design works. And to not be worried about that does not mean you're a bad designer. It just means you are a designer. Welcome. So this is only the starting point. I took a lot of information, distilled it down into one little presentation that I hope was helpful. Remember to reduce visual clutter. You're working on your visual designs. And you do that by keeping the number of fonts and colors low, adding white space, lining things up, and keeping your content short and easy to skim. Remember to think about your goal and what you want to accomplish with your design. And then look at your design through that eye. Make sure that that goal is easy to find and use. Look at your content. Make sure your content is simple, friendly, and to the point. Make it work on your content, make that less cluttery as well. And above all, practice, practice, practice. Because just like you can't become a developer by writing your first programming, like, ta-da, I'm a developer. Well, you are, but not like, you know what I mean? It doesn't mean that you're going to be an awesome designer from doing your first design. You have to do it over and over, and you will get better. So you have to remember to practice, look at designs, train your design eye, work on your intuition, and don't be afraid to start working on design. Oh, that's old slide. It's forgot to take this out. Cool. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Tracy, for that awesome talk. So now we do the Q&A. Again, get your tweets. A lot of great tweets. There's still time to get some tweets in. Now's the Q&A time, so just raise your hand, and Brian or Mike will do a mic. I'll start off. You want to go there, Brian?
Mike.
Hi.
Hi.
2 questions.
Sure.
So the first one is, how do you balance internationalization with friendliness? Because more words, right, for one of the buttons. The other question would be, if I wanted to create a web app for my own personal use, is there an easy free one where I don't have to program?
Okay, so the first one, internationalization. That's a good point. So I think when you're working on internationalization, if you're looking at the different options you have, you can just keep that in mind, that keeping something friendly when you're looking at your other options. I think it's just, there's no like hard and fast rule, right? So it's just like keeping that in mind when you're working on the different options and using that principle. So I don't have a really good answer for you on that aspect. In terms of an easy tool for building what was the second question?
A personal website.
Building a personal website. I'm going to think of the ones that are. Wix is good. Yeah, Wix. Squarespace is also a good one. A lot of people really like for building a personal website. Does GoDaddy have a builder too? Cool, GoDaddy. Yeah, so there's quite a few options out there to avoid code entirely to build up that website. I personally Wix is really great. I really like Squarespace as well. Question number 2, 3. I can't pick people. Okay.
Hi. So what would your thoughts be about presentations beyond your current example, specifically for developers when you're doing concepts versus code?
In terms of like creating presentations?
Yeah, I mean, just presentation tips. I know the normal one idea per page, stuff like that. I mean, things that you've done.
So the content thing comes into play a lot in presentations because it's really tempting to start adding all of your bullets in when it comes to presentation. So taking that content and creating it, making it as simple and as little words as possible. A lot of presentation software, you'll have the design templates available in design software, and almost all of them have like crazy little graphics and little widgets and everything like that. And it's like, no, take those out because that's part of that clutter. Like all those things are distracting from the content. And you can see that with my slides, I prefer to have just text because I don't want to have any gradients or anything that distracts the eye. So that's where that simplification of the visual design is by choosing a template or creating your own template, just working with a simple background color will help the content stand out. But then also make sure that you're not doing too much content on a slide. Another thing that a lot of people miss when it comes to presentation design is too small text. And when you're working with content, having nice big text will also force you to like reduce the length and complexity of your content because you have less space to work with. So this is actually, I think it's like 200 pixel whatever, that lime daring right there to make that large enough to be seen. That's another thing. A lot of presentation templates, they'll have too small text and make it hard for people to read from afar. So it's the next thing I usually tell people is to boost that the text size. All right, I can't pick. It's people with okay. People with the mics I have to go for.
Hi, probably it's going to be another presentation altogether, but if you're using design for mobile applications, and especially if it's, let's make it more fine-tuned, responsive design, wherein you're trying to use both for web as well as mobile, what are some of the best practices?
Responsive design. Check out the book for that. I just got this as a present. Yeah, my book is so much smaller than this. So responsive design is such a gigantic topic, and a lot of the principles I go over, where it's like reducing clutter, that definitely and for mobile you need to use that. Reducing the length of your content, all that kind of stuff will apply directly to responsive design. I struggle with responsive design myself. I always go ahead and admit that. It's another reason why I use Bootstrap, because then I can just set up the classes and then it just magically works, than me futzing over the tiny the designs, tiny little designs. There is, what is his name? Wroblewski is a designer who he's written books specifically on mobile design. It's like form design and mobile design. And if you come up to me later, I can write out his name because it's long. But Luke Wroblewski, I think he's Luke W on Twitter. He does a lot of talk about mobile and responsive and how to design specifically for those formats.
Hi, just curious, are there any signs you look for to tell yourself you've been iterating or tweaking one design for too long?
So personally, this goes for design and development for me. I try to tell myself I have to get to that 80% point, or that 80-20 thing. Well, I gotta get to the point where it's like the MVP point for design, and that works for development and works for design, where I can constantly tweak fonts or add new images or start making things perfect. But I try to get myself to stop when I'm working on my products when it's just good enough, because then I can launch it and then I can start iterating on it. So I don't think I could be hired personally. Oh no, that's putting myself down. But I don't feel like I'm the best designer in the whole world, because I'm really bad at these little details. But my specialty is working on little products and launching them and just being able to do that MVP bit and getting them out there faster, even though they might not be knowing to myself that it's not perfect yet, but it's good enough, helps me a lot. So just keeping that in mind. And sometimes when you start iterating, it's does this really matter, or can I play with this after I launch it and see if that actually affects the bottom line, because then I'll have analytics and whatnot. So I hope that little brain thing that I do helps you.
Hey, Tracy, thanks for joining us. So let's say that you reduce the clutter, you add white space, you do all of those things, and then conversion actually goes down.
Yes, done that.
How do you think about that, and how do you try that problem?
Yeah, I mean, so if your conversion goes down, then it's okay, time to look at the data. Because if you were looking at simplifying your design, that would hopefully make it easier to use and your conversion rate went down, I would suspect there's something else in play. That maybe when you're changing your content, maybe it's time to do some in-person usability testing and get people to talk to you and see, tell you what they see. Because in general, when you're simplifying, hopefully the conversion rate goes up. But I have been in that place where I've done crazy, done this gorgeous new design, and then it's why isn't it working? Go back to the old one. But it's just you gotta look into more data and maybe do more talking rather than just knee-jerk reacting and reverting back to the old design. Try to figure out what it is about that new design that might be causing that problem. Yeah, right there with you. I just had a memory of my first startup job. I was gonna sit here and awkwardly dance as the mic people go around.
Yeah, raise your hand and get a mic. Give it to one.
Okay.
Hi, I design enterprise software for a while now.
Oh, no.
And oftentimes the problem is that we design for many different persona, right, under one platform. But what is your advice for, or best practice on how do you approach design testing of that, even presenting designs? No.
That is a very good question. A lot of these principles, I guess, work for an individual developer working on the designs, because once you get into enterprise design, we're on a big design team, you have a lot of voices out there that all have their own opinions and what to do and what not to do. As much as possible, it's having that data and analytics, and if you're able to be hey, look, making this change actually did affect that bottom line, rather than just relying on it's designed better, which a lot of designers can, I do that sometimes too. I'm it's obviously prettier, please use that. But in those situations, when we're working on a team, to have the data or or something to test in order to back up those assumptions can help get that decision approved by the rest of the team. Yeah, it's also like in the book I have an example of sometimes also like corporate design stuff, especially working on like dashboards and whatnot. When I say like add white space, sometimes there's like those principles don't work in those places either. So it all depends on the context and where you're working.
Thank you.
For a lot of us, design isn't just like an individual activity.
Right.
So I was wondering how you think about bringing other people's ideas in and balancing, the appropriate amount of humility versus too many cooks in the kitchen.
Again, it's like if you have a way of being like, you know what, we're just gonna test this. We're just gonna like see what happens when this launches and see how like conversion rate going up or down depending. Like we're just reverting back to that data, especially if you're like new to design and you have no idea. You're like, I don't know if that font's better than that font. And you're like, oh, I'm just gonna test it. Well, do a like a A/B test and see if that's actually better. Just relying on data can help a lot when you're working with a team, and you don't have to worry about like justify why this font is nicer than the other font or something like that. So yeah, yes, just moving away from qualitative and moving into quantitative reasons for why something might be better.
Hendo. Hendo.
Oh. Right. Yes, I think you have to wait for the, yeah.
So I'm a founder and I'm looking to hire some.
I think your thing is off. There you go.
What are some things you look for when someone's coming to hire you? Like what questions should they ask you? What questions should you ask them to make sure it's a good fit?
I have been working for myself for like the last 8 years, and I've only had one job before that. So that's kind of hard because I've been deliberately avoiding working for someone else. For me personally, my specialty, again, I like to build products. My whole goal is to help people build things and get on the internet as fast as possible. So either help them learn how to program or learn how to design so they can build that app or create that web app that they wanted to build. So when if I'm looking for an employer, I'm looking for someone who doesn't want like pixel perfect. They want get something out and start like getting data in and seeing people interact with something. So that's my own personal, like my own type of design, as that it's like small teams and working fast and like not worrying about things being like spending months on doing the perfect shade of blue, that kind of stuff.
Oh, is it on? Okay. So I'm new to design. I'm doing visual editing for a curriculum development company after teaching for some years. And I'm having a difficult time with a client. I don't know how to communicate something with them. So I'm asking for advice on they keep adding more and more content. And I mean, I used to teach high school. I know how to cut it down to what's essential, but it keeps being more, or they're insisting that a lot of content needs to be there, but it can't exceed this many pages or this much space. So I'm having a really difficult time because I know, as somebody who's been on the other side, like nobody's going to read that.
Right.
So how do I communicate to them without sounding insulting, or I don't know. I don't know how to do it.
So it might be useful. There's a lot of studies been done on the internet about people who skim on web pages and why it's important to cut down your content. So it might be useful to like show them those like eye tracking studies that show that someone just goes from the top of the paragraph and whatnot. So you're not explaining it from yourself. You're like, hey, look at these other experts, and these other experts are also recommending this. And then show them that data that, when you have so much content, people aren't going to read it and they're more likely to leave the website. So you can kind of appeal to their like, hey, people aren't going to use your website if it's like 10,000 pages, that kind of stuff. So
print stuff, because we are making the curriculum for their.
Oh yeah.
Like people have to read it, but they're not going to.
So I think a lot of those web principles with skimming would also apply to print. It's maybe say like, when you get a giant contract and you have to sign the last page, everyone just flips to the last page and sign it because no one's going to read that. But if they have like a simple one page, people are actually going to read it. And as the client, they probably want people to read what they've written. So explain like, this is the way you're going to have people actually understand, rather than say skipping to the end and then coming back with questions or lots of support requests because they just skipped over all that content.
So I'm guilty of having so much that I think people need to know about what I'm offering. So, and I'm always told this, people skim and they never read it. But I have this business card with tiny font on it that says has my goals and my experience. People say, oh, they'll never read it. But I gave it to a very bright guy, and the first thing he says, oh, your goals are teaching 1 billion people to read English with a mobile web app. And my view is, how do we know that these tests are not on some average people who are never going to buy anything to speak of anyway?
Yeah, you can argue when you say you're looking at the goal. If you're thinking about what you're designing and what the goal is, and you want people to like have that reaction and immediately interact with you, then adding that content would be completing that goal. So it is like adding visual clutter in that you have more words on there, but the more important thing is how people work with it. So I would say that would be really successful. You have probably a more interesting business card than most people out there, because I, like everyone else, probably just sticks in my back pocket and forget about it when I'm at home. And I'm like, why do I have paper back here? So in terms of the question, what was the question in general again?
How do we know that these people who are
in general?
buyers and size of something that we're offering?
And I like to, when you're thinking, okay, the principles, does it actually, do they actually apply to like my current users? That's where I like to, again, look at data. With your business cards, you have the reaction. You need to know that people like enjoy your business card more than other people's business cards. And that goes with your designs on the web. So if you're working on a website design or a poster and looking at how people are using it and thinking about it in terms of the users and how, if you have a conversion rate or anything like that, just looking at that data, then you can start like seeing if those principles actually apply to your users. So you don't have to like add them willy-nilly and be like, cool, my design is done, I can walk away from it. Design process, you have to look back at it and say like, is this actually working? And then you can start figuring out if your users do deviate from those like best practices. I personally hate the whole best practice thing, which is funny if I have this presentation. But it's looking at how people are using it after you design it and making updates as necessary instead of just designing and walking away. I think that helps. Dance party? Yeah.
Have a mic. What's your rock music?
Obviously I can do more questions like one-on-one.
Do one-on-one afterwards for
yeah.
sure. Cool. Okay. Well, please join me in giving Tracy a warm round of applause again.